Sabrina Doyle had closed deals worth 9 figures without flinching. She had walked into boardrooms where men twice her age expected her to fail, and she had walked out owning the room. She did not flinch. She did not hesitate. She did not look back. But standing at the iron gate of her mother's garden, looking at a man she had not seen in 20 years, she could not make herself move. Malcolm Grayson was kneeling beside a rosebush, his hands dark with soil, his shoulders broader than she remembered. He had not heard her yet. The garden was exactly as her mother had left it, trimmed, watered, alive. And he was the reason why. He looked up. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Then Sabrina found her voice and asked the only question that made sense. "Why are you still here?" Malcolm stood slowly, brushed the dirt from his hands, and looked at her the way a man looks at something he stopped expecting but never stopped wanting. "I moved on, Sabrina. I just never found anyone who made me stop. If this kind of story speaks to you, the kind that stays with you long after it ends, you're exactly where you need to be. Hit subscribe and follow the channel. New stories drop every week, and there's a lot more where this came from." Sabrina Doyle's assistant had booked her a room at the only hotel in Belhaven worth staying in, which was not saying much. The Magnolia Inn had 12 rooms, a continental breakfast that ended at 9, and wallpaper that had not been updated since the Clinton administration. Sabrina had stood in the lobby for 30 seconds, assessed the situation, and decided she would be gone before the wallpaper bothered her. 3 days. 4 at the most. Sign the papers, shake a few hands, and drive back to Atlanta where her actual life was waiting. That was the plan. She was 44 years old, and she had not built Doyle Logistics from a single leased warehouse into a 7-state operation by being sentimental. Sentiment was expensive. Sentiment made you slow. She had learned that early, and she had learned it well, and there was no reason, no logical, defensible reason, why standing at the gate of her mother's garden should undo 20 years of that lesson in the span of a single breath. And yet, she stood at the gate for a long time after Malcolm went back to his work, the question still hanging between them like something neither one of them was ready to pick up. "I moved on, Sabrina. I just never found anyone who made me stop." She told herself she had misheard him. She drove to the Magnolia Inn and sat on the edge of the bed for a while without taking off her coat. She did not sleep well that night. There were things Sabrina had made a point of not thinking about for 20 years, and Malcolm Grayson was the organizing principle around which most of them were arranged. She had been 24 when she left Belhaven, fresh out of her undergraduate degree, accepted into a business administration program in Atlanta that felt, at the time, like a door opening onto everything she had ever wanted. Her mother had cried. Her father had nodded once and handed her an envelope with $300 in it, which was most of what he had. And Malcolm had driven her to the bus station in his father's truck, carried her second bag because she had overpacked, and stood on the sidewalk in the early morning with his hands in his jacket pockets. They had talked the night before, a real conversation, honest and careful, the kind that left marks. Malcolm's father had been sick for almost a year by then, the kind of sick that didn't reverse. The wood shop, Grayson & Sons, though Malcolm was the only son, needed someone to run it, and that someone was going to be Malcolm. He was not asking her to stay. He had been very clear about that. He was not going to be the reason she didn't go, and Sabrina had not asked him to come with her, because she understood, even then, that asking would have been a different kind of cruelty. They loved each other. That was never the question. The question was whether love was supposed to be enough to override everything else, and they were young enough to believe that if it wasn't enough, maybe it wasn't the right kind. So they had said goodbye at the bus station the way people say goodbye when they're trying to be mature about something that is tearing them apart. Carefully, quietly, without enough words. She got on the bus. He drove home. She told herself, for years afterward, that it had been the right thing. She still believed it was. What she had not anticipated was that being right could cost so much and for so long. Atlanta had given her everything she had gone there looking for. The degree, the first job, the second job where she learned what she was actually capable of. The partnership that collapsed and left her with nothing but a business plan and 6 months of savings, which turned out to be exactly enough. Doyle Logistics was 12 years old now, with offices in 5 cities and contracts with 3 of the largest retail distributors in the Southeast. Sabrina had been on the cover of 2 industry magazines and quoted in a third. She had a condo on the 30th floor with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the city that people told her was enviable. She ate dinner without company most nights. She had dated. Of course she had. She was not a monk, and she was not broken, and there had been men she genuinely liked, and one she had thought, briefly, she might love. But there was always a point in those relationships where she became aware of a distance she could not close, a room inside herself she did not know how to open. And eventually the men in question noticed it too, and things ended politely and without much damage. She kept moving. As long as she kept moving, she didn't have to ask what she was moving toward. When her father died, she hired a property manager for the Belhaven house and kept working. When her mother died, she took 4 days off, flew home, handled the arrangements, and went back to Atlanta. The house sat empty. A developer called 18 months later with a number that was hard to argue with. Dalton Property Group. They wanted the Doyle estate and 3 adjacent lots for a high-end resort development. The offer was clean, the timeline was clear, and there was no reason to hesitate except the ones Sabrina was not letting herself think about. She flew to Belhaven on a Tuesday morning in October, checked into the Magnolia Inn, and drove to the house to do a preliminary walkthrough before the realtor arrived. She had expected to find a house that had been slowly losing the fight against time. Peeling paint, sagging gutters, the garden gone to weeds. She had prepared herself for the particular sadness of a place that used to be full of people and wasn't anymore. She had not prepared for the garden to be in full bloom. The gate was unlocked. She pushed it open and stood in the entrance for a moment, not understanding what she was seeing. The rose bushes her mother had planted along the south wall were pruned and healthy. The flagstone path had been re-leveled. The wooden arbor at the far end, the one her father had built and never properly sealed, had been stripped, treated, and re-stained. And in the middle of it, kneeling beside a rose bush with a pair of pruning shears and a quiet, focused expression, was Malcolm Grayson. He was 46. His hair was shorter than she remembered and touched with gray at the temples. His shoulders were broader, his hands bigger, and there was a stillness about him that had not been there at 26. The stillness of a man who had learned to carry weight without making a performance of it. He looked up when he heard the gate. For a moment, neither of them moved. The garden held them both. Then Sabrina asked him why he was still here, and he gave her the answer she was not ready for, and she got back in her car and sat with it for the rest of the night. The next morning, she found out the rest of it. Margaret, the woman who had run the Belhaven post office for 30 years and therefore knew everything about everyone, supplied the details with the particular satisfaction of a person who has been waiting to be asked. Malcolm's father had died 8 years ago. Malcolm had kept the wood shop running and done well enough with it. He had a reputation for restoration work, old furniture, architectural millwork, the kind of detailed craftsmanship that was harder and harder to find. He had married Renee Caldwell about 12 years back. Good woman, quiet. They had a daughter, Tessa. Renee had gotten sick when Tessa was around 12, the kind of sick that moved fast, and she had been gone within a year. Malcolm had raised Tessa on his own since then, and as far as Margaret could tell, he hadn't so much as had dinner with anyone new in all that time. Sabrina drove to the woodshop that afternoon. It was attached to a narrow lot on the east side of the property, a converted barn that smelled like sawdust and linseed oil and something older underneath. The particular smell of work done over a long time in the same place. Malcolm was sanding a cabinet door when she walked in. He set it down and waited. "I talked to Margaret," Sabrina said. "Of course you did. You've been maintaining that house for years without anyone paying you." 3 years, he said. "After your mother passed." She stared at him. "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone searching for an answer, but the quiet of someone deciding whether the answer was worth saying out loud. "Because the house still looked like your mother's house," he said finally. "And I figured if you ever came back, you shouldn't have to come back to a ruin." Sabrina stood in the doorway of the woodshop and felt something tighten in her chest that she had no professional vocabulary for. Before she left, she set one of her business cards on the edge of his workbench. Old habit. She did it without thinking. She met Tessa that evening. Tessa Grayson was 17, which meant she had her father's stillness and none of his patience for people who hadn't earned it yet. She was doing homework at the kitchen table when Sabrina came to return a set of house keys Malcolm had lent her for the walkthrough, and she looked up with the particular expression of a teenager who is taking very careful measure of a situation. "You're Sabrina Doyle," Tessa said. It was not a question. "I am. Dad's mentioned you." She said it without inflection, which was its own kind of inflection. "I've known your father a long time," Sabrina said. "I know." Tessa looked back at her homework. "He says you're here to sell the house." "That's right." "Okay." She turned a page. "Nice to meet you." Malcolm reappeared with a glass of water that Sabrina had not asked for. She took it anyway. The realtor, a cheerful man named Davis who wore a bow tie and had clearly never met a silence he felt he should respect, walked Sabrina through the property the next morning with a printed offer sheet and a running commentary on market conditions. The offer from Dalton Property Group was good. By any reasonable measure, it was excellent. The kind of number her CFO would look at and say, "Take it." Dalton wanted the Doyle estate, the half-acre adjacent, and the lot on the east side, the lot where the woodshop sat. Current occupants of auxiliary structures would need to vacate within 60 days of closing, and Dalton was also in negotiation for several surrounding properties, Davis explained carefully. The vision was a cohesive resort experience, a unified footprint. Sabrina told him she would think about it. She found Malcolm in the woodshop that afternoon and told him what Davis had said. She did not soften it. Malcolm listened without interrupting. When she finished, he set down his tools. "I know," he said. "You knew? Word moves fast in a town this size." He looked at the tools hung in order on their hooks, the half-finished cabinet waiting on the work table. "It's your house, Sabrina. It's always been your house." He turned back to his work. No demands, no appeal. He stated the facts, stepped back, and let her decide. The same way he had 20 years ago at a bus station. Standing in his woodshop, watching him move with the composure of a man who had made peace with things being out of his control, she found herself wondering whether what she was looking at was decency, or whether it was a man who had learned to accept loss so many times that acceptance had become his first response rather than his last. She told him she was going to delay signing. 30 days. He looked up. "You don't have to do that." "I know," she said. "I'm doing it anyway." She left before he could tell her it wasn't necessary. She already knew it was necessary. She just hadn't figured out yet what it was necessary for. The 30 days began quietly. Davis sent a revised timeline to Dalton and copied Sabrina with professional cheerfulness. Sabrina moved her most urgent Atlanta meetings to video calls, handed 3 problems to her deputy COO, and told her assistant she would be in Bellhaven for the foreseeable future without explaining what foreseeable meant. She wasn't sure herself. The work of assessing the house gave her and Malcolm a reason to be in the same place without having to name what they were doing there. They walked through each room with a legal pad and a flashlight, checking the foundation, testing the windows, cataloging what needed repair versus what needed replacement. Malcolm knew the house better than she did at this point. Which floorboards creaked, which radiator valves stuck in cold weather, which section of the back porch would need to be rebuilt rather than restored. He had learned the house the way you learn something you care about. Slowly, over time, by paying attention. Sabrina took notes and asked practical questions and told herself this was a business assessment. They talked about wood grades and load-bearing walls, the age of the electrical panel, whether the kitchen plumbing was worth preserving. They did not talk about the fact that they had once kissed in the kitchen doorway when Sabrina was 22 and home for the summer, or any of the 100 small things that rose to the surface of her mind and had to be pushed back down. She was good at pushing things down. She had years of practice. Malcolm's daughter was less cooperative. Tessa had decided, with the cold clarity of a 17-year-old who reads people well and trusts them slowly, that Sabrina Doyle was a temporary condition. She was polite in the way people are polite when they want you to know the politeness is a choice and not a given. She answered questions directly and did not ask any back. Sabrina did not try to charm her. She had learned, somewhere in the last 20 years, that you cannot charm a person who has already identified charming as a technique. Instead, she just showed up. She fixed things when she could fix them. She didn't pretend to know things she didn't know. When Tessa mentioned, once, briefly, that her mother had taught her to cook because Malcolm burned everything except eggs, Sabrina asked a question about Renee that had nothing to do with the property and everything to do with the fact that Renee had been a real person who had mattered to real people. Tessa looked at her for a long moment and then answered. It wasn't warmth, not yet, but it was the first crack in the wall. 3 weeks in, the town held its annual fundraiser for the community center, a dinner in the church hall with folding tables and a silent auction, and the kind of organized noise that small towns produce when they want to remind themselves they're still a community. Malcolm had helped build the new stage 2 years ago and was therefore obligated to attend. Sabrina went because it seemed stranger not to. She spent the first hour reacquainting herself with people she had known 20 years ago, deflecting questions about Atlanta that were really questions about whether she intended to stay. She circulated and smiled and felt, for the first time in a long time, slightly outside of her own competence. She was not good at small towns anymore. She had forgotten that. She found Malcolm near the far wall with a cup of coffee and a retired mechanic named Dale, who seemed to require nothing of either of them except periodic nodding. It was, she realized, the most comfortable she had felt all evening. Then Carol Pittman materialized beside them. Carol was 62, had been the town librarian for 30 years, and possessed the particular social confidence of a woman who had never once felt she was prying. She patted Malcolm's arm and looked up at him with fond exasperation. Malcolm, I have to ask, why haven't you started dating again? It's been 5 years since Renee. Tessa's almost grown. You're not a monk. Dale made a sound that might have been a cough. Malcolm looked at Carol with the patience of a man who had been asked this question before. Renee was a good marriage, he said. I'm grateful for what we had. Carol waved a hand. I know that. That's not what I asked. Malcolm was quiet for a moment. Then he said, without any performance, in the tone of a man who is simply telling the truth, after I lost Renee, I realized there was a part of me that had belonged to someone else for a long time. I hadn't let myself think about that while I was being a husband and a father. But it's true, and I didn't know how to give that part to someone new. Carol opened her mouth. Malcolm added, almost to himself, there are questions I stopped letting myself ask. What she was doing, whether she was happy, whether she ever. He stopped. Well, Carol said quietly, that's something. Sabrina was standing 4 feet behind him and had heard every word. She waited until they were outside. The parking lot was half empty, and she caught up with Malcolm by his truck and said his name, and the way he turned around told her he had known she was there. How much of that did you hear? He asked. Enough. He leaned against the truck. Okay? Were you talking about me? Yes. She had expected a deflection, a qualification, the 20 years of distance that should have made this conversation feel safer. Instead, he just said yes, and waited. Malcolm. She stopped, started again. Is that real, or have you built 20 years of a version of me that doesn't exist anymore? The girl you knew at 24. The idea of something unfinished. She said it as carefully as she could. Because that's not love. That's nostalgia. And I need to know the difference. He was quiet long enough that she thought she might have hit something true. Then he said, when Renee was in the hospital, toward the end, she told me she always knew there was a room in me she couldn't reach. She wasn't angry about it. She said it like she was leaving me instructions. He looked at his hands. I've thought about that a lot, whether it was fair to her, whether I was honest enough about what I was carrying. Sabrina said nothing. I'm not talking about a girl from 20 years ago, Malcolm said. I'm talking about the fact that you were the last person I chose completely. Before responsibility became the reason for every decision. Before I learned how to be useful instead of... He stopped, found the word. Instead of wanted. The parking lot was very quiet. I've asked myself whether you were happy, he said. Not because I was waiting for you to come back. I had accepted that you weren't coming back. But you were the person I still wanted to tell things to, and I never found anyone else who was that person. He looked at her directly. Is that an answer to your question? Sabrina thought about the 30th floor and the view that other people called enviable and the dinner table she sat at without company 300 nights a year. I haven't forgotten you either, she said. I used work the way some people use drinking. As long as I kept moving, I didn't have to feel how much I'd left behind. The words were harder to say than she expected, even now, even at 44. I'm not 24 anymore, she said. I know. And you're not who you were either. No, Malcolm said. I'm not. A couple walked past them to a car, not noticing anything, and drove away. Then Malcolm closed the distance between them, and she let him, and they kissed the way people kiss when they have been not kissing for 20 years, carefully at first, and then not carefully at all. It did not make things simpler. What it did was strip away the professional courtesy they had been using as scaffolding for 3 weeks, and what was underneath was everything they had not figured out how to navigate in their 20s and would have to figure out now. They were deliberate about it. 2 adults, not teenagers. They had dinner. They walked the edge of the property in the evenings, and Malcolm told her about Renee without softening it. The way they had met, what their marriage had actually been like, the hospital, the last year. He did not make Renee smaller to make room for Sabrina, and Sabrina did not ask him to. That mattered. Sabrina told him things she had never told anyone in Atlanta, because the people she knew there knew the version she had built, and that version did not have a past she was allowed to be sad about. She told him about the relationship at 31 that had lasted 2 years and ended when the man said, not unkindly, that he felt like he was always trying to reach her through glass. She told him about the night she signed the lease on the Atlanta office, 10 p.m., a pile of papers, an empty room, and how she had sat there afterward and realized there was no one she wanted to call. Malcolm listened. He did not try to fix any of it. She had forgotten that about him, that he could sit with a hard thing without trying to turn it into something manageable. One evening near the end of the 2nd week, Tessa came home to find Sabrina at the kitchen table going over paperwork while Malcolm made dinner. She stood in the doorway longer than usual. Then, without saying anything, she sat down across from Sabrina and opened her own homework. She didn't explain the choice, neither did Sabrina. But the choosing to sit there, that was Tessa's way of saying something she wasn't ready to put into words yet. Then Atlanta called. Her CFO first, then her deputy COO, then 3 board members inside of 48 hours. A merger she had been building for 18 months was coming apart. The lead investor was getting cold feet. 2 board members were suggesting, through the careful language of concerned advisors, that Sabrina's extended absence during a critical period was affecting confidence. What they meant was, come back, or we'll find a reason to move without you. And then Dalton Property Group sent a revised offer, 15% above the original number, with a note that the timeline for closing was now a hard deadline. Any further delay would trigger the liability clause in the letter of intent. She told Malcolm that night. They were in the wood shop, where she had developed the habit of sitting on a stool near the door while he worked, because it was the easiest place to say honest things. She laid out the board situation, the merger, the Dalton deadline. He listened, kept working. I have to go back, she said. At least a week. Maybe 2. I know, she hesitated. Then she said what she had been building in her head at 2 in the morning. The plan that seemed clean in the dark, and felt less clean the closer she got to saying it. When Tessa graduates in June, I could set you up in Atlanta. A proper shop, restoration work, millwork contracts. I have contacts who would use you inside of a month. You and Tessa could start fresh in the city. Sabrina. She stopped. Malcolm set down his tools and turned to face her. Is that what you want? He said. Or is that what solves the problem? I want to find something that works for both of us. That's not what I asked. She opened her mouth, closed it. I'm not a variable in a logistics problem, he said. There was no anger in it, just a bedrock steadiness that was harder to push against than anger would have been. You found an efficient answer, but you haven't asked me what I want. You've decided what would work for me and packaged it as an offer. I was trying to find a solution. Were you? He said. Or were you trying to find a solution that fits the life you already have, and asking me to step into it? The question landed somewhere she hadn't been expecting. She wanted to say he was wrong. She ran the logic back through her head and found, with the specific discomfort of someone rarely wrong about logistics and occasionally wrong about everything else, that he wasn't entirely wrong. That's not fair, she said. I came back. I've been here for 6 weeks. I'm not the one who said no before hearing the full question. I didn't say no. I asked what you actually want. And I'm asking you to consider a different way of building something together, by moving everything I've made to your city. He said it without accusation. Tessa's in her last year of school. The shop has clients who've trusted me for years. This isn't a location preference, Sabrina. This is my life. I know it's your life. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, you walked in here with a plan built around what works for you, and you were asking me to fit into it. He picked up his tools again, slowly. I'm not going to accept that and call it a compromise. The silence that followed had weight in it. I have a company, she said finally. People who depend on it. I can't just... I know you can't, Malcolm said. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying you came in here with a finished plan and presented it as a question. That's different from actually asking. He set the tool down again. I'm not 26. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. She drove back to the Magnolia Inn without saying anything else she was glad about. She left for Atlanta the next morning. She told herself she needed to go, which was true. But before she left, she did something she told herself was practical rather than emotional. She signed the continuation form that kept the Dalton negotiation technically active. Not a closing agreement. Not a final commitment. Just enough to keep the option open. She signed it because she was hurt and tired, and because there was a part of her, the part that had been making hard calls for 20 years, that had learned to cut clean when things became complicated. She knew it as soon as she'd done it. She sent Davis the form and drove north. Malcolm found out that evening. He stood in his kitchen for a while. Then he began, quietly, calling clients to let them know the shop might be relocating. Tessa came home from school and found him on the phone and knew immediately what was happening. She waited until he hung up. "You're doing it again," she said. He looked at her. "You let her go. Again. Without saying one true thing about what you actually want." She set her bag down. "Dad, you've spent my whole life teaching me to be honest about what I need. When are you going to do the same thing for yourself?" Malcolm had no answer for that. Tessa went to her room. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time, in the house that had always felt like enough, trying to figure out when he had confused endurance with strength. In Atlanta, Sabrina won. 9 days of closed-door sessions with the board. A restructured earn-out proposal that rebuilt the investors' confidence. 2 board members neutralized. Her CFO told her she was remarkable. Her attorney said she had saved the merger. She sat in her office at 11:30 on the 9th night, the city spread below her, and felt the specific emptiness of a victory with no one in it. She had been 24 when she chose this life. She had been right to choose it. She still believed that. But she was 44 now, and she had just run the same play she had run 20 years ago. Leave when it gets hard. Protect what you've built. Trust that time sorts out the rest. Sitting there with the merger saved and nowhere to put the feeling, she understood something she had been successfully avoiding for a long time. She had not grown as much as she thought. She had just gotten faster at making the same mistake. She looked out the window for a long time. Then she picked up the phone and called her CFO. She told him she wanted to discuss a permanent structural change to the executive team, something she should have done years ago and had kept finding reasons not to. He said he would schedule it first thing in the morning. She said, "Tonight. ACT 3. 2,363 words. The call came 3 days later from a number she didn't recognize. She answered on the 3rd ring. It was Tessa. "I found your card," Tessa said without preamble. "The one you left on Dad's workbench. I've had it for a few weeks." "Okay," Sabrina said carefully. "I'm not calling because he asked me to. He doesn't know. He'd be angry if he did." "What's going on, Tessa?" A pause. Not calculated, but the pause of a 17-year-old who has talked herself up to the edge of something honest and is deciding whether to jump. "He's shutting down the shop," Tessa said, "calling clients all week. He hasn't said where he's going because there is no where. He's just clearing space. He does that. When he thinks something is over, he starts putting things away before it actually ends, so it hurts less when it does." Sabrina was quiet. "He's not going to call you," Tessa said. "He thinks you've made your decision, and he's going to respect it. And in 6 months, he'll be somewhere else, doing work he's good at, and never talking about any of this." Her voice stayed even. "And then I leave for school in the fall, and he'll be on his own." "Tessa, I'm not asking you to fix him. My dad doesn't need fixing, and he'd hate knowing that was the reason." A breath. "I'm calling because I've watched him for 5 years since my mom died, and I know the difference between him being okay and him pretending to be okay. Right now he's pretending. And I think you might be the only other person who can tell the difference. Because you're the only other person I've seen actually look at him and see him." Sabrina stood and walked to the window. 30 floors down, the city moved without her. "You don't even like me," she said. "I don't know you yet," Tessa said. "That's different." She did not call Malcolm. There were things she needed to do first, and she had learned, in 20 years of running a company, that the emotional decision and the practical decision did not have to be enemies of each other. You could want something and also build the conditions that made wanting it sustainable. She spent 2 more days in meetings and came out with 2 things she had been working toward longer than she had admitted to herself. The first was a permanent president of operations, someone who could run the day-to-day without Sabrina in the building. She had resisted this for years, telling herself the company needed her hands on everything. She understood now that this had never been about the company. It had been about having something that required her constant presence, so she never had to ask what she wanted her presence for. The second was a proposal for a regional office in the county seat, 20 minutes east of Belhaven. Small to start. Enough to make her presence there something other than a pause. She drew it up that night and sent it to her CFO before midnight. Then she called her attorney and told him to withdraw from the Dalton negotiations. Not pause, withdraw. He named the liability figure carefully, as if he expected her to reconsider. "Pay it," she said, "and send me the confirmation." She booked a flight for the next morning. She arrived in Belhaven on a Thursday afternoon in early December, when the light was low and gold, and the town had the quiet of a place settling into winter. She drove past the Magnolia Inn without stopping and went directly to the woodshop. The barn doors were open. Malcolm was inside, but the shop looked different. Tools that had hung on the wall were packed into cases. The work table was cleared. Nothing new waited to be worked on. He heard her car and came to the barn door. He looked at her for a long moment. "You're supposed to be in Atlanta." "I was," she said. "Now I'm here." She walked past him into the shop and stood in the middle of it. "Stop packing," she said. "Sabrina, I'm not here to apologize for going back to Atlanta. I needed to go, and that was true. What I did before I left, the form I signed, that was wrong, and I need to say that directly." He said nothing. "I did what I always do when something scares me," she said. "I made a decision so I didn't have to feel the uncertainty. I called it practical. It wasn't. It was fear with better vocabulary." She paused. "And then I went to Atlanta, and I won a negotiation, and I sat in my office with the city below me, and I felt nothing. Because I have been winning things in that building for 20 years, and somewhere I convinced myself that was the same as a life." Malcolm had not moved from the barn door. "You were right," she said. "I came in here with a plan built around what worked for me, and I called it a solution. I didn't ask what you wanted. I assumed what you needed and presented it like a proposal." She looked at him. "That's not love. That's logistics. And you deserved better than that." The shop was quiet. "But I need to say something else," Sabrina said, "because I think we've both been honest about everything except the hardest thing." She waited until he was looking at her directly. "I can't move to Belhaven full-time, and I'd be lying if I said otherwise. I have a company and people who depend on it, and that is real. But I've spent 20 years using that company as proof that I don't need anything else. And I am done doing that." She took a breath. "I want to be with you. Not a version of you that relocates to my city or steps into a box I've already designed. You, here, with everything you've built here. I don't know exactly what that looks like yet. I know it will require things from me that I've never let myself give. But that is what I want. You asked me once. That's my answer." A silence. Then, "I withdrew from Dalton," she said. 2 days ago. The house isn't being sold." Something shifted in his face. He looked at the cleared work table, then back at her. "Sabrina, that's not a small thing. I know what it cost. I did it because I wanted to, not because it fixed a problem." She held his gaze. "There's a difference." "I'm starting to understand the difference." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I did something wrong too. Malcolm, let me say it." He gathered himself. "You asked me if I was holding on to something real or something I'd constructed in my head. The honest answer is both. For a long time I kept a version of you in my mind that stayed exactly as I remembered, and that wasn't fair to you or to Renee or to the truth." He paused. "But what I feel when I'm actually with you, the person you are right now, 44 years old, difficult and capable and scared of the same things you've always been scared of. That is not nostalgia. Sabrina looked at her hands. I've also been hiding behind this place, he said. Bellhaven, the shop, Tessa, they're all real, and I love them, and they're also very good cover for a man who learned to accept loss early and never entirely stopped expecting it. He looked at her steadily. I let you leave without telling you what I actually needed. I dressed it up as principle. It wasn't principle. It was fear. What did you need? Sabrina asked. For you to want to come back, he said. Not because you'd fix something and this was next. Just because you wanted to be here. I'm here, she said. He crossed the remaining distance and took her face in both hands. Careful, the way you are with something you're not entirely sure is as real as it seems. And she put her hands over his, and they stood that way in the quiet of the wood shop before he kissed her. This time it did not feel like a question. They did not solve everything that week. They didn't try to. What they did was sit across from each other at Malcolm's kitchen table and talk about the practical, unglamorous details of what it actually meant to build a life between two people who had spent 20 years building lives separately. How often they would move between cities. What happened when the company had a crisis? What happened when neither of them wanted to compromise and both of them were right? They argued about real things and learned how to finish the argument without one of them going quiet and the other pretending not to notice. It was harder than the parking lot, more specific, more like work. She thought, more than once, that this was what Malcolm had been doing all these years. Not waiting, not standing still, but learning to be honest about what something actually cost before agreeing to it. She was learning that too, late. But learning. Tessa came home from school the second afternoon to find Sabrina at the kitchen table with a legal pad, working through something, and Malcolm making dinner. She stood in the doorway and assessed the situation with the forensic attention she brought to everything. Then she sat down across from Sabrina. My mom's name was Renee, she said. She was funny. Not obviously. She had this very dry thing. She could make my dad laugh when nobody else could reach him. I'd like to know more about her, Sabrina said, if you're willing to tell me. Tessa looked at her for a long moment. Yeah, she said. I will. A year later, the Doyle house opened its doors as the second beginning house. Sabrina had resisted the name for about 2 weeks before admitting it was right. The center offered financial coaching, operational guidance, and access to capital for small business owners who didn't know where to start. The first cohort was 12 people, single parents, mostly, a few recent immigrants, and a woman who had been cooking out of her home kitchen for years and needed help making it official. Malcolm had rebuilt the interior himself. He did not accept payment. The regional office opened in the county seat the same month. Small, for now. Enough. At the opening ceremony, Sabrina spoke briefly. She said the house had been the last thing she expected to keep, and that keeping it had asked something of her she wasn't sure she had, and that it turned out she did. She did not say Malcolm's name. He was standing at the back of the room, and if she looked at him, she would not finish the sentence. Tessa left for college in the fall. Before she got in the car, she stood with Sabrina in the garden and said what she had been working up to for a year. Not a compliment, not a thank you, just the truth. He didn't need someone to rescue him. He just needed someone with enough nerve to stay when things weren't settled yet. Sabrina held on to that sentence for a long time. That evening, she and Malcolm stood under the arbor in the garden, the one he had rebuilt, the one her father had built before that. The one where 20 years ago she had tried to say goodbye like it was something a reasonable person could do and walk away from intact. We were wrong the first time, she said. We were 24, he said. We did the best we knew how. And now? He took her hand. Not dramatically. The way you take someone's hand when they are beside you, and that is simply where you expect them to be. Now, Malcolm said, we go in. They did. And that's the heart of this story. Not a grand gesture, not a perfect ending, but two people who finally stopped being reasonable about love long enough to fight for it. Because here's what Sabrina and Malcolm teach us. You can make the right decision and still spend 20 years grieving it. You can be honest and still leave the most important things unsaid. And the hardest kind of courage isn't the kind that walks away cleanly. It's the kind that comes back, sits down, and says, I don't know exactly how this works, but I want to figure it out with you. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. Every week there's a new story about the choices we make, the ones we almost didn't, and the people worth coming back for. We'll see you in the next one.